Hey, Pops, you hearing me? This is a frogman's gym, not a retirement home. Push the mop somewhere it counts, and let real operators work. The voice carried across the empty weight room the way young voices do before sunrise, when the building still belonged to the night shift and the men who cleaned it. The old man behind the mop did not flinch. He did not look up. He guided the gray water across the rubber matting in a long, even stroke, lifted the head, set it down a hand's width over, and pulled it back again. He moved the way water moves around a piling, without argument, without waste, and the boy who had spoken found his own words hanging in the air with nowhere to land. It was 5:40 in the morning. The Naval Special Warfare training gym sat low and wide at the edge of the compound, a steel building full of iron and chalk and the smell of old sweat. And at that hour, it was nearly empty. A single bank of lights buzzed overhead. The pull-up bars along the far wall were beaded with the cold. Through the high windows, the sky was still the flat black of the hours that belonged to no one. The hours the old man had always liked best. He had been there since 4. He emptied the bins, wiped the bars down one by one, squared the dumbbells back onto their rack from smallest to largest, and worked the floor in widening lanes, the way a man clears a beach methodically, leaving nothing behind him undone. He had worked that floor for nearly 6 years, since the knees finally told him the boat charters were over, and in 6 years, he had learned the building the way he had once learned a coastline, by its sounds and its smells and the places where the cold gathered. He knew which fan rattled. He knew the loose tile by the chalk bins. He came in before the world and left as it filled. And in all that time, he had told no one anything about himself that they had not already failed to ask. It suited him. A man could carry a great deal in a quiet building before dawn and set none of it down where anyone would see. He was 79 years old. He was stooped a little at the shoulders, lean in a way that had nothing soft left in it. And his hands were the hands of a man who had used them hard for 60 years. His coveralls were gray and clean and pressed. There was a name stitched over the pocket, but no one in that gym had ever bothered to read it, and he had never offered it. Petty Officer First Class. Tyler Brandt was 26 and 3 weeks into the proudest stretch of his life. The trident on his chest was new enough that he still caught himself looking at it in the mirror, and he had brought 2 of his swim buddies with him to the early lift so they could all admire the same thing in the same glass. He was big and fast and genuinely gifted, the kind of young man the pipeline turns out at its best and worst, and he had not yet had the one thing taken from him that teaches a man the size of the world. He dropped his bag by the bench nearest the old man's lane, loud, and grinned at his friends. "Look at this," Brandt said. "Guys mopping like it's a competitive event." One of the others laughed, because that was what the others were there to do. The old man wrung the mop once into the bucket, set it against the wall with both hands, and turned to lift the bin liner. The motion was small and unremarkable, and it was also exactly correct. Every joint in line, no effort wasted, the way a man stows a weapon he has stowed 10,000 times. He carried the bag to the door without hurry, and came back for the next. Across the floor, by the squat racks, a big man in a coach's polo stopped with a 45-pound plate held flat against his chest. Walt Okonkwo was 58, and built like a retired heavyweight gone gray, which was close to the truth. He ran the strength program for the team, and before that, he had run a great many harder things, and he had the kind of eyes that had learned to watch the quiet man in any room. He set the plate down on the rack without looking at it. He was looking at the old janitor. One of the swim buddies, a thick-necked second class named Doss, snorted into his water bottle. The third, a leaner kid named Pruitt, glanced once at the old man with something closer to discomfort, and then looked away, the way decent young men do when they sense a thing is wrong, but lack the rank or the nerve to stop it. The old man gave no sign that any of them existed. He carried the bin liner to the door, tied it off, and came back with a fresh one already half unrolled in his hands. Brant loaded his bar and lay back and pressed it, talking the whole time, narrating his own set for an audience of 2. The old man worked around him, careful of the spilled chalk, careful of the bag left in the lane. When Brant racked the bar with a clang and sat up, he found the old man wiping down the bench beside his, and it irritated him in the particular way that calm irritates the loud. There is a kind of young man for whom another man's peace is a provocation, a thing to be poked until it breaks, and Tyler Brant that morning was exactly that kind of young man. "You don't have to clean where I'm working," Brant said. "Seriously. You're like a ghost, a sad little janitor ghost." The old man straightened. For just a moment his eyes met Brant's, and they were a pale, washed gray, perfectly still, holding nothing the boy could push against. Then he moved on to the next bench, and the next, and the cold light buzzed, and somewhere a fan turned over, and the morning went on. Okonkwo watched the old man set the mop against the wall a second time, watched the care in it, the economy, the way the handle came to rest at the precise angle a man would choose if he expected to reach for it again in the dark. He had seen men handle gear like that before. He had not seen a civilian do it, not ever. He set his clipboard down on the rack. He did not know yet what he was looking at. He only knew that the floor of his own gym had changed temperature, the way water changes when something large moves underneath it, and that the source of the change was the stooped old man in gray coveralls, emptying the bins as the sky outside the high windows began, at last, to gray toward dawn. The boy on the bench was still talking. The old man was already 3 lanes away, and he had not raised his voice once. A climbing rope came down off the wall at the far corner with a heavy slap, its anchor cleat finally giving up after a season of abuse, and 20 feet of thick line landed in a snarl on the mats. One of Brant's swim buddies swore and kicked at it. The knot was a disaster. A fast rope line fouled on itself, the kind of mess that took a bored sailor 10 minutes and a lot of cursing to undo. The old man set down his bucket and crossed to it. He crouched, ran the line once through his fingers to find the lay of it, and his hands began to move. They moved before his eyes, seemed to, faster than thought, the way a typist's hands know the keys. He freed the foul with 2 turns, ran the rope through his palm, and began to coil it, not in loose loops the way the trainees did, but in a tight, seized honk. Each turn laid clockwise and dressed flat against the last, finishing with 3 frapping turns and a clean bite tucked through. He hung it on the cleat, gave the cleat itself a short, hard test with the heel of his hand to see if it would hold, found it would not, and set the coil instead on the floor against the wall where it could not fall on anyone. The whole thing took perhaps 20 seconds. His hands knew the rope before his eyes did. Okonkwo had crossed half the floor without deciding to. "Watch his hands," he said quietly, to a junior coach who had wandered in with 2 cups of coffee. "Civilians don't move like that. Nobody teaches that. That's 20 years in the water, that coil. That's muscle that doesn't forget." The junior coach looked and saw only an old man putting away a rope. He shrugged and handed Okonkwo a coffee, but Okonkwo did not take his eyes off the old janitor, because he had spent his whole life learning to read the small language of competence, the tells that men in his old world wore without knowing they wore them, and the old man was speaking that language now in every motion, fluently, the way a native speaker can never quite hide his first tongue, the way he had checked the cleat before he trusted it, the way he had set the coil down on the side where it could not fall on anyone, the way he had, not once, in any of it, made an unnecessary movement. You did not get that from a long career mopping floors. You got it from somewhere else entirely, somewhere Okonkwo had been himself. The old man had already moved on. He noticed a bar racked wrong on the platform nearest him, the collar loose, the plates uneven, a thing a trainee had left in a hurry. He squared the bar without being asked, slid the plates true, and retaped the loose collar with a strip from the roll on the rack, smoothing it down with his thumb. As he worked, he said, not loudly, to no one in particular, the way an old craftsman talks to a tool, "That's a fouled lay. You'd lose a finger doing that off a deck." It was not a complaint. It was a correction, delivered in the exact, worn vocabulary of a man who had handled lines where a fouled coil could kill you. Brant had heard the murmur. "What did you say, Pops?" The old man set the tape roll back in its place. "Nothing worth repeating," he said. 2 words past the necessary, no more, his voice low and even and entirely without heat. Brant laughed and looked to his buddies to laugh with him, and they did. But the laugh had a slightly different shape now, because the old man had not given them anything to push against, and there is nothing a young loud man hates more than a wall that does not push back. "Fouled lay," Doss repeated in a high mocking sing-song. "You hear that? Old-timers got opinions on rope." He flexed for the mirror. Maybe he can teach the knot-tying block coach. Real subject matter expert over here. The old man wiped his hands on the rag at his belt and moved on. He did not appear to register the mockery as mockery at all. It washed over him the way water washes over a stone that has been in the river a very long time. And that complete absence of reaction was beginning, in some animal part of the young men, to feel less like the meekness of a beaten old man and more like the patience of something that has simply decided you are not worth the trouble. They could not have said why, but the closer they pushed, the more the floor under them felt thin. Okonkwo was close now, close enough to see the old man's forearms, where the gray sleeves had ridden up at the cuff. They were ropey and brown and laced with old scars, the kind of scars that come from coral and steel and things that bite in salt water, faded white lines over faded white lines. And on the inside of the left forearm, half under the rolled cuff, there was ink. Old ink, gone soft and green-blue with the decades. The lines blurred the way only real years blur a tattoo. He could not see all of it. He could see enough of it to feel the hair lift on his arms. He went very still. He had seen that shape of ink exactly twice before in his life, both times on men who were dead now, both times on men whose names were spoken in his old community in the lowered voice you used for saints and ghosts. The old man rolled his sleeve back down without seeming to notice he was doing it, picked up his bucket, and went back to the floor. Behind him, the coach stood rooted between the squat racks, a 45-pound plate forgotten in his hand, looking at a janitor as though the floor had just opened under his feet. By 6 o'clock, the gym had filled. 24 young operators moved through the iron in the rising light, and the corner where Brant held court had become a small theater. The old man's calm had become the joke of the morning, and the joke had grown teeth. "The cleanup crew's been deployed," Brant announced, to general laughter, as the old man passed with his bucket. "Heavy resistance at the latrine. Pops here held the line." $20, said one of the swim buddies, a thick-necked second class named Doss. "Says the closest this guy ever got to the teams was watching the movie." "I'll take that," said the other. "Because look at him. He's got to be 80. What's he gonna do, frogman the bingo hall?" The old man emptied a bin. He folded the liner. He set a fresh one in and rolled the lip down neat. He did not appear to hear any of it, and his not hearing was so complete that it began to work on the young men like a draft from an open door, a cold they could not locate. Then Doss flicked a wet towel. It caught the old man across the shoulder with a small, wet snap, and a few of the men around the bench winced before they remembered to laugh. The old man reached up, lifted the towel off his shoulder with 2 fingers, folded it in half, and then in half again, with the same unhurried care he gave everything, and laid it on the rim of his bin. He looked at Doss for one moment. Doss, who had thrown the towel, found that he could not quite hold the look and busied himself with his phone. Across the room, Okonkwo had come halfway up off his bench, his jaw set hard, and then made himself sit back down. Not yet. He wanted to be certain. He wanted to see the whole of the ink, and to be sure his old eyes and his old hopes were not making him a fool in front of the morning crowd. A thing like that, you did not say out loud, unless you were sure. A thing like that, you did not get wrong. The old man wrung his mop and started a new lane. Brant, sensing his audience cooling, reached for the surest laugh he knew. "Hey, Pops, do us a favor," he called. "Tell us your sea stories. Come on. You were what, a cook? Supply? You hand out the towels? Bet you've got a real chest full of medals at home, right? Next to the participation trophies." For 1 second, the old man stopped mopping. He raised his eyes and met Brant's across the gym floor, and in that single second, there was something in the pale gray stare that made the young SEAL's grin falter at the edges without his understanding why. It was not anger. Anger, the boy could have answered. It was a vast and level calm, a bottomless quiet, the look of a man standing in shallow water who has seen the deep. Then the old man looked back down and pulled the mop, and the moment closed over like the surface of a pond. If you have ever watched the young forget what the old once paid, stay with this one and subscribe to the veteran vault. It might have ended there as a bad morning among many if Brant had been able to leave it. But the old man's calm had become a personal affront, a debt the boy felt he was owed. And at 26, 3 weeks into a trident, Tyler Brant did not yet understand that some debts are better left unpaid. He got up off the bench. He walked into the old man's lane and planted himself there, arms crossed, blocking the path of the bucket. "I'm trying to train," Brant said, loud enough for the room. "And you keep crawling around my feet with that mop. So here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna take your little bucket and you're gonna clear out of this corner. Or I'm gonna clear it for you." The old man stopped. He looked at the bucket and at the young man's boots planted on either side of the lane he had not finished, and then up at the young man's face. The gym had quieted around them, the way a room quiets when something is about to tip. "I've got 6 feet of floor left," the old man said. His voice was mild. "Then it's all yours." "You've got nothing," Brant said, "that I don't give you." And then he made the mistake. He reached down and seized the old man's forearm, the left one, his big young hand wrapping the gray sleeve to haul the old man bodily out of the lane. What happened next happened too fast for most of the room to see clearly, and several of them argued about it later. The old man did not pull away. He did not stiffen or shout. His free hand simply came up and closed around Brant's wrist, and for 1 second, the young SEAL's wrist was held in something that was not like a hand at all. It was like being caught in a cleat. It was like a line gone tight under load. There was no shaking and no display, only a single, total, unarguable pressure, bone and old muscle, and behind it, the clear and casual promise of a great deal more. For 1 second, the boy's wrist was in a vise of bone and old muscle, and the boy understood, somewhere below thought, in the old animal part of him that keeps men alive, that he had made a mistake. Then the old man let go. He stepped back, picked up his bucket, and moved it the 6 feet to the end of the lane himself, finishing the stroke he had started, setting the mop against the wall at its precise angle. The red print of his grip was still fading on Brant's wrist when he turned around. Brant covered it the only way he knew how, with volume. "Okay, Grandpa's got a grip," he said, shaking his hand out, grinning too wide. "Somebody get him a protein shake." The laugh he got was thinner than the ones before. 2 of the junior sailors near the door had found somewhere else to look. The temperature of the room had changed again, and this time, even the loud ones could feel it. But Brant could not feel it, or would not, because the thing that had passed through his wrist had frightened him, and a frightened young man of his particular kind does not retreat. He advances. He shook the hand harder than the small ache called for. He told himself it was nothing, that the old man had simply caught him at a bad angle, that there was no possible world in which a 79-year-old custodian had hands like a hydraulic press. He looked at the old man's narrow back, at the gray coveralls, at the stooped shoulders, and the evidence of his own eyes argued against the memory in his own wrist, and he chose his eyes. It was the second mistake. It is always easier to make the second one. The old man said nothing. He picked up the folded towel from his bin, carried it to the laundry hamper by the wall, and dropped it in. Everything in its place. That was when Walt Okonkwo crossed the floor. He came across the gym at an unhurried walk that nonetheless cleared a path, the way a big man moves when he has decided something, and he put himself between Tyler Brant and the old janitor, his back to the old man, his face close to the young SEALs. "Son," Okonkwo said, low, just for the two of them and the few near enough to hear. "Stop talking. Right now. You have no idea who you are standing next to." Brant blinked. "Coach, it's a janitor. I know exactly what he is," Okonkwo said. "You don't." He turned, slowly, to the old man, and something in the big coach's bearing had changed entirely, had gone formal and careful and almost shy. He looked at the gray coveralls, at the scarred forearms, and he asked a single quiet question, and he asked it in the worn shorthand of the old community, the words a civilian would never have known to use, a question about a team and a place and a year. The old man considered him for a moment, the way a man considers whether a door is worth opening. Then he answered. Plainly, briefly, correctly. He gave the team. He gave the place. He gave the year, spelling it out the old way, 1969, as though it were yesterday afternoon. And then he added one short phrase, a thing only a man who had truly been there could have known, a piece of the old hard slang of the riverine teams, and he said it without any weight at all, the way you might mention the weather. It was the phrase that did it. Okonkwo could have argued with the rest. A man might read about the teams, might memorize a unit, might steal a year off a headstone. No one stole that phrase. You earned it in the water, or you never heard it at all. Okonkwo's face came apart, and then put itself back together with great effort. "I served, Master Chief," he said, very quietly, and the title landed on the gym floor like a dropped weight. 2001 through 2020. I came up hearing the stories. I'd know that frog anywhere. Brant was still standing there with his grin half-built and nowhere to put it. What the boy in the fresh trident did not know is what the next few minutes would teach him. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The black water of the Rungsat Special Zone did not give back the moonlight. It took it. In the small hours of a night in 1969, two men slipped off the low gunwale of an idling boat into the tidal dark of the Mekong Delta, and the water closed over them without a sound. The younger of the two was 22 years old. His name then was Petty Officer Daniel Faraday, and he was already, in the small and secret way of his trade, becoming something the men around him spoke of with care. The water was warm as blood and black as the inside of a closed hand. They swam on a compass, bearing, and a count of strokes, faces just clearing the surface, breathing on the troughs, two shadows among the mangrove shadows. They wore no tanks on this one, nothing that would bubble or gleam, only fins and masks pushed up on their foreheads, and the charges sealed in rubber and slung tight to their bodies. and they breathed the thick green air of the delta and tasted mud and rot and salt with every breath. Beside Faraday swam his partner, his swim buddy, a quick laughing kid from Ohio named Sully Sullivan, who could hold his breath longer than any man Faraday ever knew, and who had a wife and a baby girl he had never met, waiting on the far side of the world. They had been swim buddies for 14 months, which in that place and that year was something close to a marriage. Sullivan talked too much on land, and not at all in the water, and Faraday was the reverse, and somewhere in the difference the two of them had become a single instrument. They knew each other's kick. They knew each other's breathing. In the dark, with no word possible, a hand on a shoulder said everything, and they had a whole language built of touches no one had taught them, a language they had made between them, stroke by stroke in 100 black rivers. A man does not get many partners like that in a life. Most men get none. There were no medals in the water that night. There was only the tide, and the work, and the man beside him. Their target was a moored sampan riding low in the current 2 miles upriver, a boat that intelligence said carried something the war wanted gone. They reached it in the last hour before the tide turned. They worked along the hull by feel, in the dark, below the waterline. Their breathing slowed to nothing, and they fixed the charges to the wood with the patient, practiced calm of men who had done this until it lived in their hands and not their minds. Above them, on the deck of the sampan, men they could not see, moved, and spoke a language they did not need to understand. And a single misjudged breath, a single bubble breaking wrong, would have ended it. Neither of them hurried. Hurrying was how men died. They had learned the great secret of the trade, which is that the calmest man in the water usually comes home. Faraday set the timer, his fingers reading the dial in the black. Sullivan checked it, a hand finding Faraday's wrist, a single squeeze. Good. Set. They slipped back into the current and began the long swim home, and for 11 minutes, it was the cleanest night of their lives. 2 shadows sliding downstream with the tide, the work done, the boat behind them, the boat that would not be carrying anything anywhere ever again. Then the riverbank lit up. It was not supposed to be there, the gun on the far bank, and afterward no one could say whose mistake it had been. Only that tracer light came skipping across the black water in long red strings, and the night turned to noise and spray. Faraday felt the rounds walk past him, felt the river jump, and he heard Sullivan grunt once, a small, surprised sound, almost polite, the sound a man makes when he is hit before the pain arrives. Faraday did not stop to think, because thinking was the slow way to die. He had Sullivan by the harness before the next burst came, and he rolled them both under, down into the black where the tracers could not follow, and he began to swim. He swam for 2 miles with a dying man on his back. He counted strokes because the count was the only thing that could not betray him. 1, and 2, and 3, and breathe. 1, and 2, and 3, and breathe. The arithmetic of survival, the only prayer he knew. He talked to Sullivan the whole way, low, into the water, a steady murmur of nonsense and orders, and the names of streets back home, the name of the baby girl in Ohio, talking to a man who had already, somewhere in the first half mile, stopped answering. He kept the head up. He kept Sullivan's face out of the water with a discipline that had nothing to do with hope, because by then there was no hope left, only the thing that comes after hope and is harder, which is faithfulness. He kept the bearing. The tide tried to take them sideways into the mangroves, and he fought it stroke by stroke. Every yard a negotiation with a river that wanted them both, and the charges went off behind them, a dull red thud that lifted the river and threw their 2 heads forward in the water, and he did not look back. There was nothing behind him he needed. Everything he was carrying was on his back already. He brought Sully Sullivan to the extraction point as the sky began, at last, to gray. He brought him all the way home. It did not matter. It had not mattered for over a mile, and Faraday had known it, and had swum anyway, because you do not leave your swim buddy in the water. Not living, not dead, not ever. They gave him the Navy Cross for that night. They wrote it up in the careful language of citations, 800 meters of this and enemy fire of that, and they read it aloud at a ceremony, and he stood through it and said thank you, and never once took the medal out of its box again. He did not keep the citation on a wall. He kept one thing from those years, and he kept it on the inside of his left forearm, where a young tattooist in a back room in Subic Bay had needled in the small green figure of a swimming frog, the mark of the men who went into the water. And over the decades, the ink had blurred and softened until it looked like something the sea itself had left there. On the gym floor, 57 years later, the old man's thumb moved once across the faded frog on his forearm, the only monument he had ever needed, and then was still. Tyler Brandt should have stopped. Okonkwo had given him the door, had handed him the word, Master Chief, like a rope thrown to a drowning man, and all the boy had to do was take it. But there were 20 operators watching, and 3 weeks earlier, Brandt had stood on the grinder and rung a bell and become, in his own mind, untouchable. And he could not, in front of all of them, simply stand down for a janitor and a coach's say-so. Pride is a current, too, and it was carrying him fast now toward the rocks. A Master Chief, Brandt said, and made it ugly. Right. Sure. You know how many guys come through here with stories, Coach? Everybody's grandpa was a frogman. Everybody's got a buddy who was a SEAL. He spread his arms to the room, performing now for all of them, because the performance had become the only thing holding him up. Half the bar stools in this town have got a guy who'll tell you he was at some op he can't talk about. Stolen valor, all of it. And now we're supposed to come to attention because the janitor said a word Coach liked? He turned on the old man, and his voice climbed for the room. You want them to think you're somebody? Fine, let's see it. Let's see if Pops even has a tattoo, or if he's just full of... He grabbed the old man's left wrist and yanked the sleeve up to the elbow. The old man let him. That was the thing the room would remember, the thing Brandt would remember for the rest of his life. The old man could have stopped him. Every person near enough to have felt that grip a minute before knew he could have stopped him. Instead, the old man simply turned his forearm to the light and let them all see. The way a man opens a door he has kept shut a long time, because someone has finally, rudely, knocked. The cuff slid to the elbow, and there it was. The frog. The small swimming figure in old green-blue ink, blurred at the edges the way only real years blur a tattoo, sitting on a forearm laced with coral scars, and rope burns, and the white seams of 50 years. It was old ink, soft and faded, and unmistakable to anyone who had earned the right to know it. And around it the morning's laughter died all at once, as if a hand had closed over a radio. A senior trainee near the front, a first class named Vega, who had spent time around the old community and listened where it counted, went pale. That's not. Guys, that's a real one, he said, and his voice cracked on it. That's an old UDT frog. The hand-poked kind. Subic, Da Nang. That era. You can't fake how that ink ages. That's the real thing. That's a plank owner's mark. The words moved through the gym like cold water finding a low place. Doss had stopped grinning. Pruitt had taken a half-step back, his face working. The young men who an hour ago had been laughing now looked at the small green frog on the scarred old forearm, the way men look at a thing in a museum case that they have been told is sacred and have only just begun to believe. Stand down, Okonkwo said, low and final. All of you. Now. And in the new, and total silence. Footsteps crossed the gym floor. They were measured and unhurried. The footsteps of a man who had never in his adult life needed to rush, and every head in the building turned toward the door, except one. The old man simply lowered his sleeve, smoothing the cuff with his thumb, and waited, as he had waited for a great many things in his long life, with his hands quiet at his sides. Captain Ellis Reyes had commanded men in 3 wars' worth of places no one would ever name on a map, and at 48, he wore his eagles the way the best of them did, lightly, as a weight he had grown used to. He had come to the gym to look at his team the way he did most mornings, unannounced, before the day buried him in a headquarters. He crossed the floor, reading the room as he came. The silence, the circle, the boy with his hand still half raised, the old janitor in gray coveralls at the center of it. He had heard, somewhere in the building over the years, that an old plank owner from the early teams was living quietly out past the gate, one of the last of the men who had built the thing he commanded. He had meant to find him. He had meant to, the way busy men mean to do the things that matter. And the years had gone by, and he had not. He did not yet know that he was about to. Then he saw the forearm. He saw the frog. The captain stopped walking. His eyes went from the ink to the scars, to the pale gray eyes in the weathered face. And the room watched the commanding officer of a Naval Special Warfare team go through, in the space of 3 seconds, the same journey the morning had refused to take. Confusion first. Then a dawning, impossible recognition. Then something the young men had never seen on the captain's face and would never forget. A kind of awe, naked and unguarded, the look of a man meeting a story he had been told as a boy. "That's a Team Frog," Reyes said. His voice was very quiet in the silent gym. "UDT. That's the real ink." He took 1 step closer, and his eyes searched the old man's face. "And that's—" He stopped. He said the name as though it were something he was almost afraid to touch. "Master Chief Faraday. Halyard." The old man inclined his head a fraction. "Captain," he said. What Captain Ellis Reyes did then, he did before anyone could speak, before the boy could lower his hand, before the room could draw breath. He came to attention, squared and crisp, in front of the entire team. And he rendered honors first. The commanding officer of the team saluted the janitor with the mop bucket, held it, and did not drop it. "The rung sat," Reyes said, still holding the salute, loud enough now for all of them. 1969, 2 miles under fire with his swim buddy on his back. Navy Cross. Plank owner. There are men in the dirt at the bottom of that river that this man brought home. His eyes swept the gym, and there was iron in them now. Every one of you rang a bell to get in this building. This man helped forge the bell. The water you think is so hard, gentlemen. He is the reason it is shaped the way it is. The men who wrote your standards learned them from men who learned them from him." He paused, and let the silence hold the weight of it. "You are standing in the presence of one of the founders of everything you think you are, and one of you put your hands on him to get a laugh, and the room rose. It happened all at once, a single motion across the whole gym floor, 24 young operators coming to attention, the iron forgotten, the chalk dust drifting in the gray light, every spine straight, every chin level, every eye forward. Doss stood at attention with the wet towel still draped on the bin behind him, and he did not dare reach for it. Pruitt stood with his eyes fixed on the far wall, his jaw tight, ashamed in the deep way that changes a man. Vega, the trainee who had recognized the ink, had tears standing in his eyes, and did not wipe them, and was not ashamed of them. It was the kind of silence that has weight, that presses on the ears, the silence of a great many young men understanding all at once that they had been in the presence of the thing they were all trying to become, and had mocked it because it came in gray coveralls with a mop. The old man looked at all of them, at the rows of hard young men standing rigid for him in the cold dawn light, and something moved across his weathered face and was mastered. He lifted one scarred hand, not quite a return of the salute, more a gentling, the gesture a man makes to settle a boat. "At ease, Captain," he said, and his voice was as mild as it had been all morning. "At ease. I'm just cleaning the floor." Tyler Brandt stood frozen at attention 3 feet away, his arm finally down at his side, and on his face was the dawning and complete understanding of exactly whose lane he had tried to clear. The reckoning came fast, and from the boy's own house. Captain Reyes lowered his salute, and when he turned to Petty Officer First Class, Tyler Brandt, his face had gone to stone. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He named Brandt's chief and his platoon, and told him to be standing in front of both within the hour, and he relieved the boy from the floor on the spot. And the few clipped sentences he used to do it were worse than any shouting could have been, because they were quiet and exact and final. "You put your hands on him," Reyes said. "You put your hands on him to perform for an audience. That is not a SEAL. We will discuss at length what you are going to do to become one." He let that sit. "If you ever earn the right to understand what you did this morning, it will keep you up at night for the rest of your life. I hope you earn it." Brandt's face was white. "Yes, sir," he managed. He looked as though the floor he had ordered cleared had finally cleared, and taken everything solid with it. It was the old man who stopped it. He stepped forward, the bucket left where it stood, and he put one scarred hand lightly on the captain's sleeve. "Captain," he said. "A word." Reyes turned at once. "Master Chief." "He's a young frogman," the old man said. His voice was low, and it carried only because the room had gone so still. 3 weeks off the grinder, by the look of him. Full of it, the way we all were. The way you were, Captain, and don't tell me different. The faintest line touched the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. Don't break him for it. That's a waste of a swimmer. Make him better. Let him learn it standing up, not on his knees. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Subscribe to the veteran vault, and let this old man's story find the people who need it. Reyes looked at the old man for a long moment, and then he nodded. Once, the way you nod when a senior man has told you something true. "As the Master Chief recommends," he said quietly. Brandt, hearing it, made a sound that was not quite a word. The gym emptied slowly after that, the young men filing past, and many of them stopped, and some of them put out a hand, and the old man took each one and said something brief and kind and let them go. To one he said, "The water never gets easier, you just get quieter." To another, who could not meet his eyes, he said only, "Look at me, son. There's no shame here, just a lesson." And the young man looked and took it. He gave each of them a moment and a word, and asked nothing back, and one by one they went out into the morning carrying something they had not walked in with. Okonkwo stood by the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes bright and said nothing at all, because some things did not need saying between men who had been in the same water. When the floor was nearly clear, he came over, and the two men stood a while in the quiet, and at last Okonkwo put out his hand, and the old man took it, and the big coach held the old frogman's scarred hand in both of his for a long moment, as though he were holding something he had been told as a boy was only a story. It was an hour later, the floor near empty, when Tyler Brandt came back. He found the old man by the laundry hamper, coiling the fallen rope again to hang it properly, now that the cleat was fixed. The boy stood at a careful distance, and when he spoke, his voice had nothing left in it but the truth. "Master Chief, He stopped, started over. "There's no version of what I say now that's enough. I know that. I'm not asking you to make it okay. I just need you to hear me say, I'm sorry. For all of it." The old man looked at him. Then he held out the coil of rope. "Stow this for me," he said. "Right hand over left. Clockwise. Dress every turn flat. A man should know how to do it before he ever needs to." He put the rope in Brant's hands. "You'll need it someday, son. Maybe in the dark. Maybe with somebody on your back." Brant took the rope as though it were made of glass and began, clumsily, under the old man's quiet eye, to coil it right. Dawn the next morning found Daniel Faraday on a quiet stretch of beach a mile from the compound, where the gray Pacific came in long and slow and the sand was hard and wet at the tide line. He stood there alone for a while in the cold, an old man in a windbreaker, watching the water that had been the country of his whole life. He had come to this beach most mornings for 6 years, before the floor, before the bins, when the world was still black and his. The sea did not care what he had done, or what anyone had failed to call him. The sea had taken Sully Sullivan and a great many others, and it had given Daniel Faraday back, again and again, for reasons he had stopped trying to understand, a long time ago. And every morning he came to the edge of it, the way a man visits a grave that is also a home. Then he crouched, and with one scarred finger, he drew in the wet sand the small shape of a trident, careful and deep, the way you draw a thing you mean to last as long as it can against the tide. He did not speak. He did not need to. He had been talking to Sully Sullivan for 57 years, in the only language that ever mattered, which was to keep going, and to keep faith, and to bring the young ones home. A respectful pace behind him stood Tyler Brant, who had asked the night before if he might come, and who had been told only, "Be at the water by 5, and bring nothing." He now stood with his hands folded and his head bowed, and said nothing, learning the first true thing he had learned in 3 weeks of being a frogman, which was how to be silent in the presence of something larger than himself. He did not yet understand all of what he was watching. He understood enough to know that he was being given something, and that he had done nothing to deserve it, and that this, perhaps, was the shape of the thing the old man had tried to tell the captain to let him learn standing up. The tide came up and took the trident, the way it takes everything, and the old man straightened and turned and walked back up the beach toward the long gray building and the day's work, his step unhurried, his hands quiet at his sides. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.